an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's Friday. Welcome in. Here we go. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network. Dave Trafford here, along with Keith Leslie, John Wright, Sabrina, Nanji. The gang's all here on this St. Patrick's Day. And this part of the world, it's raining. But it reminds me of the university days here in Toronto. By now, there was a lineup outside Dooley's on Bloor Street at Yonge, waiting to get in there. Spend the whole day. The one day. Anyway. Plenty to talk about in and around Queen's Park. But I want to start with the announcement this morning, I guess the official announcement from Anna Bailao. She has decided that she is going to run for Mayor of Toronto. And we know that the new mayor will be chosen before Canada Day here in Toronto. And I heard her on this morning. She was on John Moore's show on Newstalk 1010. And her issue is going to be primarily around the Gardiner and the Don Valley Parkway. And rather than charging tolls on those highways, she wants the province to actually take care of all of it. She wants it uploaded to the province.
What has been happening over the last few years is that the province has been coming at the end of the year with a check to fill the hole of the budget. Credit where credit is due. The province has been doing that. Every year, at the end of the year, they come in and give us a check. Well, that budget hole, the majority of it, is caused by the decrease in ridership that we had on the TTC. Does anybody think that we're going to increase ridership? We're going to attract people back with less service, with less safety, with the worse service offering? No, we need to improve those services, fix the services in order to fix the budget. So instead of giving us the check at the end of the year, let's talk about a permanent solution. By the way, these were provincial highways. By the way, no other city around us pays for highways. By the way, lots of people in the region, about half of the people that use these highways are from all over the region.
Right.
So it's a fair deal. It's a fair deal to fix the services that both the province and us at the city represent.
Makes sense to me. Keith Leslie.
Well, let's face it. It was the province, the Wynne government specifically, that stopped the city from putting tolls on the Don Valley and the Gardiner Expressway. And the reason it did so was because of the seats in Mississauga that it wanted to hang on to, which are always the ones up for grabs. Let's face it, the people in Toronto who live in the city don't necessarily use the Gardiner and the DVP that much. And the tolls, could be set up where they're structured for Monday to Friday and to keep people, get them out of their cars, take the transit in, all the right things. Well, the province stopped that. So therefore, the province, her issue here makes perfect sense. The province should absolutely upload these provincial highways and take full responsibility for them. Stop this check at the end of the year thing. However, I don't think that's going to stop the city going to the province and the feds at the end of each fiscal cycle and demanding more for a check for something else. Whatever it's going to be, they're going to need more money because they still can't. Right now, it's development fees and being made right through the changes in provincial legislation. But I don't think her issue here that we'll stop going to the province for a check each year. I don't think so. It, however, does make sense to let the province take responsibility for the Don Valley Parkway and the Gardiner Expressway. That makes infinite sense.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, whether the math works out, John, she's planting a flag and saying, I'm standing up for the people who live in Toronto, and she has to establish that relationship with the province, and that's always been said that was John Tory's secret weapon, that he was able to manage that and the feds. So I think there's the right tone there, quite frankly, I think she's right in as much as the province should be taking responsibility for the highways. There's no other city that has to worry about maintaining the Gardiner Expressway.
I don't know what to think, Dave. I think, except that it's early on in what people are saying should be the ballot question. I just cannot see us going to the polls and sort of saying this is all about highways in the province. All the province has to do is say, no. like, is that what it all comes down to? Is like, you're going to do this. And it's like, No, the cheese has slipped off the cracker. I mean, that's kind of I don't know where we're going to be 2 months from now in terms of what the issue is. I just again I come back to this and sort of say, she's obviously done the polling with Nick Kouvalis, and sometimes when you can't find the one thing that you want to talk about either now or later, you insert something in the in-between stage, and this might be, what it's all about. But I'm just not convinced yet that we have an adult discussion here at the table. And I'm a resident of this city and have been for decades and decades, and I just get angry that there is nobody who decides to take on the provincial and the federal government saying this is the biggest city and we need help and all that stuff. In return, what you're going to get, however, is them saying, we spend money on everything to everybody all the time, so cut back on that stuff too. This is I don't know where we're going to be, as I said, 2 months from now, but I don't think that this is going to be the ballot question that people go to the polls on and say, yeah, we want a highway uploaded, and there you go.
Sabrina?
I think certainly this has the potential to be a wedge issue, but I kind of agree with, what my co-panelists have said too. It's a lot to stake your claim on when you don't really have much guarantee from the province. And we all know John Tory's old line that he doesn't really envy being a boy in short pants going up to the province and asking for things, because as we know, municipalities are creatures of the province. But to John's point about having Nick Kouvalis on her team, obviously Nick has an ear with Ford's office as well. And so while I've reached out, it's still early. I haven't really heard back from the province on what they make of all of this yet officially, but it might not be so much of a wild card. And I do think it's also interesting because her campaign, I mean, while we don't have formal political parties at the municipal level, she's got Kouvalis and, some PC support on one side, but also Tom Allison, veteran liberal war room guy, who's worked on many campaigns. So they both teamed up before to help John Tory, and obviously they've been successful in the past. But I think this is shaping up to be an interesting race, and obviously I am very excited at the fact that we're talking about policy, because obviously the Gardiner is a serious issue, whether or not you think the proposals are so serious so far.
The one thing I will note is that Anna Bailao stepped down from her job to do this, to run for mayor. Bob Richardson and I were going at it on Twitter this week when I suggested that if Brad Bradford or Josh Matlow want to register as a candidate for mayor in this city, will they commit to resigning their seat? And Bob was rather animated on Twitter, so we're going to have him on the podcast to actually discuss it. But they treat this as if it's a waste of time, a waste of money, etc. And I just still think that it gives them an unfair advantage to be able to. Brad Bradford was standing behind the City of Toronto podium this week talking about housing and sounding very much like a mayoral candidate when he was doing so. To be able to do that through the course of the campaign, I just think is entirely inappropriate. Keith?
I agree. We had this discussion last week, of course, and I saw your exchange with Mr. Richardson, and he's very vociferous in his position. He really thinks you're wrong on this, or that we're wrong. I disagree. It's just I don't want to rehash last week's debate. So I'm just going to say I disagree. I mean, MPPs, before they're actually sworn in, if they've been elected, but we'll take the Hamilton case, Sarah Jama, she's just been elected. She, as an elected MPP, cannot go in the Queen's Park Media Studio until she's officially sworn in, and it's gazetted and all. There's procedures for all these sorts of things. Part of that is to stop people from campaigning using the Queen's Park as a backdrop for it, as their offices at Queen's Park. So yes, provincial members of Parliament would have to resign their seat to run for mayor. Why shouldn't the city councillors? From their point of view, it's a long way till the next municipal election. John Tory just won in last fall, so they don't want to have to give up that seat. I understand their reasoning here. It's a sure thing. I can run for mayor, and if I lose, I just keep going on my city council salary and pay, keep that position. It's almost a too safe a position to be running for mayor of Toronto.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to Hamilton Centre. I guess the no real surprise in the outcome, I guess, Sabrina. But boy, the voter turnout was like 22% or something like that.
Yeah, that was depressing for me, but also really not surprising. Like by-elections are typically low turnout anyway. I feel like there's probably a little bit of voter fatigue at play here. It's March break. We were just at the polls provincially last June and then municipally in the fall. So I get it. But, JAMA still won easily. It wasn't even close. She won by about 6,000 votes, 54% of the people who turned out. But obviously there was kind of this controversy in what was supposed to be a, relatively quiet and easy win. One of the first, certainly the first electoral test from new leader Marit Stiles. If she had done anything short of like a major win, I think, people would have been looking at her a little bit more closely. She's got another test coming up, of course, in Kitchener Centre. Because she's already lost another MPP, Laura May Lindo. And I think, no one was really surprised by this, but the controversy surrounding Sarah Jama and some of her statements that were deemed anti-Semitic and activist by some other people I had talked to that didn't like how she was referring to Hamilton police and said that they had protected Nazism. She obviously didn't really manage to shake that off, but then there was this Hail Mary late in the night, election night apology that came out where she acknowledged her harmful comments. She said that, it was a poor choice of words. Marit Stiles had been staunchly defending her. And then to acknowledge, this was inappropriate in the face of rising anti-Semitism. So I think that they probably avoided a really intense first scrum next week at Queen's Park when Sarah Jama gets there, because they had also been avoiding reporters in the press gallery, the local radio station, which really surprised me. I was also on the snub list. But, this was I think the New Democrats are feeling pretty okay about how it all turned out.
Yeah, John, when you start to talk about, even the mention of the Middle East or Israel, Palestine, and you can't have, I don't know that you could actually have a conversation in the course of any campaign without it splashing on you poorly.
Yeah, and there's even reason nowadays to talk about Israel in their own political situation, with, there's lots of stuff there going on that even you'll find people on this side of the pond who are supporters of Israel who are very concerned about what is happening with Benjamin Netanyahu and how he's moving to have legislation that overrides the Supreme Court. Look, I took this as kind of a big nothing burger. She got elected with, I think it was a point difference between what Andrea Horwath got. I mean, it's Hamilton Center of all places where, since Noah was a cabin boy, there's been somebody who's been the NDP in that neighborhood. So I just kind of went, okay, well, it was almost nothing to me to see happen. I think what happens, though, is, again, to the Liberals' default, is it puts somebody back at Queen's Park who's got something to prove, a new constituency to defend. It's got more teeth for the NDP, and they're the only ones on the stage right now. And even I hope we get to the commissioner and the integrity commissioner and some of the stuff that's being done there. But they command the stage. There's nobody else there, so it doesn't surprise me that this is the way it's ended up too.
One thing I noted out of that Hamilton by-election, which really annoyed me, was the Progressive Conservative candidate, of course, refused to attend the one debate, as most of the Conservative candidates did throughout the general election last year. They just don't feel the need to do that. But apparently this PC candidate tried to convince the Liberals and Greens as well not to attend the debate to try and, fuel the flames about Sarah Jama and the anti-Semitism allegations against her. Really? This is the way you want to do it? You're going to get some solidarity by trying to, stop everyone from going to the debate because you're afraid to show up at the debate? That's just pathetic, and it's just so sad that the Progressive Conservatives have reduced themselves to this. Not only they're afraid to show up to debates, they want to try and get the debate completely canceled by bringing others in. Just cheap, lowball politics from a party that had no chance in Hamilton Centre anyway, of course.
You were going to say something, John?
Well, I was just going to say, if you want to bleed into this next issue, there is no sense of accountability nowadays.
Right.
The thing with the Conservatives is that's a tactic which comes out of all the last couple of campaigns. Even in Scarborough and other places in Toronto, they just didn't show up. And why? Because you don't want to I think we talked about this. It's kind of, well, who's sponsoring these debates? It's just a packed meeting anyways. There's a bias or screaming and yelling. You can't really have an intelligent conversation, but then again, it's politics. I mean, there's no sense of accountability. Even in, you move to I was very interested in what the Integrity Commissioner wrote about, and I think it could easily apply to so many other jurisdictions, and that is they can't even talk about the appearance of a conflict. I mean, there's just no teeth anymore. When the Prime Minister of this country is seen to be in conflict of ethics, it's just kind of like, well, you know what? That's the way he sees it, but it's not the way I think of it, and let's carry on. I mean, it's the same way with any government nowadays, and I thought it was a bit funny to read that the commissioner had said that he'd approached the legislature to see if they could change the legislation to allow him to, look at things of a perception as opposed to the reality of it. But it's just like, are you kidding me? You're going into the political meeting and asking them to lower the bar. The only bar that matters is the Queen's Park bar. But these are the sort of things nowadays that there just doesn't seem to be a sense of accountability. You and I can remember, we can remember that the cabinet ministers resigned over stuff that came out in the budget, like was leaked, like within, days of it happening federally or provincially, there'd be people who go, oh man, you're gone. Well, now in the last decade and a half, we have the entire budget that's leaked, in the 2 weeks leading up to it, so that there's no problem when you see it. So I guess my rant today is that there doesn't seem to be any accountability. So what should surprise a cynical public unless somebody stands up and says, we're going to vote all against you. Well, that's what happened in Hamilton Center. It didn't work out to them because I guess the party decided it didn't matter to them.
But it kind of comes back to this, and I hate to be picking the scab again, about stepping down if you want to run for mayor, because there's an accountability question around here. And we have actually conditioned the voters to say, oh, doesn't matter to them, why the hell would I care? So all of a sudden now there's no there in so many things. And I recall having coffee with Vic Fideli, and it was January the 24th, 2018. And the reason I remember that is because I'm pretty sure it's the day that Patrick Brown got knifed in the back. So we were talking over coffee about the Auditor General, and it was, the recent report had just come out at the end of the year, and we were talking about this, that, and the other thing, and I was talking to him because I was involved with the P3 group, and the AG was so adamant and poorly informed about public-private partnerships, and Vic says to me, well, when we're in government, we are going to take every word to heart from the Auditor General. We are going to take every recommendation and implement it. And I thought, oh, really? So we get to that point, I guess, Sabrina, where this week it all sounded very dramatic that the Integrity Commissioner wanted to put the Doe and Stag party aside while we were looking at other things. And it sounds as if it's got some, I guess, weight to it. But to John's point, this is just waiting as in, wait, soon come, and nothing's going to come.
Yeah, and to your point, I'm still waiting on the PCs to restore the Auditor General's oversight over government advertising, which they promised to do, and 2 mandates later, it still hasn't happened, and it doesn't sound like it's going to happen. But you're right. I mean, a watchdog is only as good as his teeth, and David Wake is a lot more bark than bite. I mean, he kind of said it himself in this 10-page decision explaining why he's, punting this second request, which I should add, specifically targets Doug Ford. And while Wake's current investigation that, is overlapping with this one and the Greenbelt and whether developers were tipped off, focuses on the housing minister. And so I think, the appearance of a conflict of interest, Wake even says it himself that while it's an interesting question, he has no power to make any findings of wrongdoing, let alone launch an investigation into it. He says it's a really high bar. MPPs have to swear an affidavit. It's not easy to just go file a complaint with the Integrity Commissioner. They have to provide evidence and whatnot. And I think that this was a report that I really read between the lines of from the integrity commissioner, because he's kind of saying, like, obviously he's paying attention to the news, but he's neutral, he's independent, and he's trying to, I guess, maybe cut through some of what's out there. He seemed to say, you know, Doug Ford is telling you guys, I've been cleared, the commissioner cleared me. But if you read between the lines of Wake's report, it seems to say, not so fast. I cleared him based on the information that was given to me, and I can only do my best with what I'm given. And so that's why I think he's kind of given us this cliffhanger, and I hope there's some meat on the bone. He says that he's reviewing this extensive material. They've prepared summonses for government and non-government sources. Like, I'm just waiting for the stripper at the bachelor party to be called by the integrity commissioner. Oh. That's a bad joke. But, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see, because he will have to table a public report, at least for part of this complaint. And whether or not he decides to take on Stiles's second complaint that specifically goes to Doug Ford, I think it seems like he is kind of there is a compelling case for it. But at the end of the day, you know, is this enough to actually make a finding of wrongdoing? I'm not sure. Wake says the only question that matters is whether Doug Ford himself received money. And, you know, if I'm a developer paying $150 to go to this Buck and Doe, it's not like I handed it to Doug Ford and therefore it's kosher. So I don't know if we're going to get a smoking gun, but we're probably going to get a lot of really interesting and juicy information at the very least.
Sabrina nailed it there. That last point was exactly it. Unless there was cash envelopes being handed directly to Doug Ford by the developers at the Stag and Doe or at the wedding, there's nothing for the Integrity Commissioner to investigate. They could give envelopes of cash to the Premier's family. That's not for him to investigate. I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying that's how the rules are. The rule is strictly cash to Doug Ford, pretty much, or else there's nothing for him to investigate.
I actually burst out laughing when I read the comment that effectively said, and I apologize to my friends who are in the media, and that is, newspaper articles are not evidence. It's like you just see this affidavit on the top, you know, oh, blah, 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 and evidence this and that, and then stacked underneath it looks like a university paper that you've got slipped under the door late at night to the professor, and it's got another 30 pages of, you know, copied newspaper articles. Look, one could argue that the only time at Queen's Park that any comeuppance has been meted out is when you have control over a committee in a minority situation. And I hate to go way back in my memory, but there's at least another couple of us who were probably around at the time in Queen's Park when the Administration of Justice Committee was able to maneuver and to do things, call people before the committees and, you know, take them down, you know, and they usually didn't start with the Premier. They started with the lesser people and worked their way up in the pyramid. I mean, that's what you do to bring your case forward. But there's nothing that is going to compel anybody to, you know, go forward with. One could even argue that federally, even when you're in a minority situation, that what we see in some of the committees up there is they don't do anything anyways because of the implicit bargains that they have with the governing party. So who knows? But it just takes me back to my main point, and that is that there just doesn't seem to be a sense of accountability or integrity, you know, across the land. And then you kind of turn and say, well, why are we having low turnout at the polls? Why is there all this cynicism amongst people who go to the polls and vote? Well, take a look in the mirror.
Well, I mean, to the point that this is March break, too. I mean, the idea, I mean, talking about cynicism, I mean, that you would set a by-election for March break when most people are distracted or maybe not even in town, never mind. So I just think that's part of it, too. But, you know, again, it being March break, Sabrina, that just means that there's more of an opportunity for, you know, Mr. Nakvi to be making noise about his leadership bid for the Liberals. For whatever reason, it just seemed to come as if it were out of the blue. I mean, this has been on the radar for weeks already, but you know, today, all of a sudden, it's as if the newsrooms woke up and said, holy cow, he wants to be the Liberal leader in Ontario.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about blurred lines between campaigning and governing. I mean, there's probably a lot of questions about Nate Erskine-Smith and Yasser Naqvi too, who have been touring, holding fundraisers for these so-called exploratory bids. And, you know, in their defense, it's not like there's actually been a Liberal leadership race set yet. But these guys are still, out there kissing babies and raising money. And it's not even at this point governed by Elections Ontario. So there's not really much transparency there. But yeah, you're right. I think NACV took the next step to making this a done deal by stepping down with his parliamentary secretary roles federally. It's not really surprising. I mean, Marit Stiles was taken off the education critic file before she ran for the leadership unopposed. I guess it's just questions of, using certain resources for your personal campaigns, that type of thing. But yes, there's no shortage of names being floated around. This week also, Navdeep Bains has been getting a play in the Toronto Star. He's been name checked by Liberals for weeks now. And I guess the Draft Nav campaign is talking to the Star about why they think he's great. But I don't think we're really going to see anyone come out officially until we get the date. And I think that will probably happen this summer.
I heard this phrase this week, and I'm shocked I haven't heard it before. It's called negative partisanship, and the idea that we can be partisan only because we're negative. So it doesn't, back to that whole opening with Anna Bailao, where she's taking the opportunity, I think, to try and be positive and take a step forward in terms of everything else. You got to wonder. If, in fact, we're going to get to a point where, whether it's in the city of Toronto or provincially now, once we get to the next election, this really is going to be about, I'm the one who is going to take down fill in the blank, right? Take down Doug Ford. We're going to protect you from Marit Stiles. That's sort of the tone of all of this, and it kind of lends itself to that attitude why we've got such low voter turnout. I mean, I realize that engages a base, Keith, but that's part of the whole problem here as well.
Well, we're not offering better government and new ideas and a whole new future. We're offering that other guy's just evil. Those people are so far wrong. They're the devil, pretty much. We haven't quite called them Nazis yet. We're getting there. We might get there soon. It's that kind of stupidity. And, of course, it turns everyone off. It's why so many women don't even want to consider entering politics, because of that just straight-up vitriol. There's no sense of collaborative government, of going there to make it better, to make the government's legislation better, even though the government's got a majority and you're the minority. Do something. Try, make your point publicly. Do it in a positive way. Yes, it's after 2 elections. It's going to be time for a lot of people going to campaign on, I'm the one that can dump Doug Ford. I can beat the Conservatives. Of course, there's going to be some of that, and there always will be. And we always knew that the negative plays better. But really, it just turns people. That's why, I'm with Sabrina. I think 22% for a by-election turnout in Hamilton Centre. When I watched CHCH yesterday doing live hits in the morning show, a lot of people didn't have an idea in Hamilton Centre that there was a by-election. Mm-hmm. That's often the case, too, when there's just the one thing happening like that. So 22% wasn't that half bad. Of course, it's really sad that we would say something like that. But this is where we are. We've turned people off politics. We've turned people off the newscast for pretty much the same reason. Everything is so negative, they don't want to watch. They don't want to listen. They just, will take their own feeds, their own social media feeds, and stay in their own little worlds. That's why so much can go on without this. You need to offer something that's positive, and I think that's why Mike Schreiner seemed to win the debate last election, because he was offering something, and he was doing it in a way that didn't tear everyone else down, to the point where Doug Ford said, I can work with you. That's what we want. That's what people want to see. I can work with him. I don't like his politics, but I can work with. That's sort of, and we don't see that, or we don't see nearly enough of it.
John?
But none of that translated into any votes for Mike Schreiner. I mean, He kind of ends up as the lone stick in the field. I mean, there he is, and he is after every election campaign. Look, I've contributed a lot to the bottom line of this province. I have 4 almost completely adult children. Okay, so this guy is trying to solve the half a baby shortage that all of you others, in fact, have created. So they're going to pay taxes, they're going to look after us, and they're going to, into our old age, they're supposed to nurse us and do all that sort of stuff. However, we're talking about the Gardiner Expressway, and I know half of them don't live in this city, the other half do. But there's no chance of them ever owning a home the way we're going. I do not know how they have any hope except to move to Calgary or to Edmonton. I mean, is that their option now? The big province of Ontario and the great city of John Tory's, now in the past, that has got potholes on every street corner. And, even the police report the other day about the TTC, sorry, my rant on it, but it's kind of like, we noticed that crime went down during January and February when we put the police on, so we're going to take them off. What kind of nonsense? It's like, all right. So we have unaffordability. We have, even home care. We were going to talk about health care, but home care is a stopgap where you've got 85% of people who are growing older say, I want to age in place, which is not a bad thing. And as I said last time, the only people who are starting the discussion in this province on home care are the hospitals, because they don't want to be swamped with a bunch of people who actually show up at the door, have to be put somewhere, and then shipped to the northern areas of the province because they have nowhere to stay. The issues that we're dealing with in by-elections and other stuff is not triggering the anger quotient. Like this is the thing that progress in society oftentimes is made more in anger than it is in love, and you just feel this whole section, whether it's federally or provincially, where there's a whole group of people not being addressed and another group of people who are about not to be addressed. And this is the thing where it's not carving out, to relieve that pressure valve. I'll just end it with saying this. I called a national leader during the course of the pandemic. And I said, the most alarming thing that I'm seeing here is I've got 13% of the public who is really, really angry over the impositions of all of these different COVID things. And I can see them in my data in different parts of this country. And from the other questions I've asked, they're mobilizing. And they're going to shut down whole areas of the country if we're not careful, because you keep squeezing them into a corner and then they explode because they have nowhere else to go. And the answer was, well, let them explode. We'll throw them in jail, and, they have to protect the rest of us, so we have to inoculate us and they have to come along and blah, blah, blah. You squeeze people into the corner, and guess what happened a month later is that we get Ottawa occupied, and that's not gone. I mean, that's not gone, because underneath the surface, you're getting those people who were part of that convoy now welcoming, a foreign leader of a party who doesn't exactly, turn my crank that I want to go and have a drink with her. I mean, there's a whole series of things here that go on when you don't alleviate this kind of pressure. So, this is the thing that is concerning me, that we're talking about issues about, I hate to say it, maybe she's right at the end of the day, but we're talking about the Gardiner Expressway. When my kids can't afford, to get a place to live, and even if they do live in the city of Toronto, how do they eat? How do they eke out an existence? These are the sort of things that I think are front and center, and if you don't address them, then there's going to be much bigger problems in the next short while.
All you have to say now is, I'm John Wright, and I approve this message.
Yeah, well, you know what? And maybe I'm just getting like the cranky old guy, who's sitting in the top part of the theater, yelling at the screen. But you get this sense in this country that there are big, big, big issues under the surface that are affecting so many people in this city. It's so many people in the province. It's so many people in this country. And they're just not talked about. They're not being addressed. And this is where I think, you've got a province which, because they have the majority, and I'll even say that the approval ratings that the premier had out the other day by another polling firm, as I've said before in this place, they do their methodology a little bit differently. My methodology has them sitting at 40%, not down another 5 points. The reality is that you look at this and say, in order to get a majority government in this problem, you only need 37%. So, frankly, the rest of them don't really matter to parties who get to that level. And this is, I think, though, nowadays with the anger from COVID and the irritability and a whole series of these other issues, it can spill over. And I think we're headed in that direction.
Before we go, anything that, is there any possibility of a surprise, Sabrina, vis-a-vis provincial budget?
I would not hold my breath for anything too crazy, too exciting. I mean, Peter Bethlenfalvy, finance minister, said it's going to be, quote, more of the same. So that's an exciting teaser. But I do think we might actually see some changes at the municipal level, or maybe some of the beginnings of that. There's been a lot of talk about like these regional reviews. And so while I'm not really holding my breath for any movement, I do wonder if we are going to see something about your big bugaboo with the councillors still being able to hold their council seat. Because I had heard shortly after John Tory stepped down that was something the Ford government also thought, people in the Ford government thought was unfair, and they were looking at potentially changing. But again, it was sort of around this time when rumors were just flying everywhere. But I do think that, the Ford government is on the same page as you, and they might end up making that change. They've obviously shown they have no problem tinkering with what happens at City Hall. So stay tuned, but don't hold your breath.
I'll be looking to see if they do anything about development fees for the municipalities.
Yeah.
Also an unanswered promise. Yeah. They promised to make them whole. So this would be an interesting time to show their cards. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and if they make the change in vis-a-vis the municipal councillors running for mayor, then Bob Richardson can turn his guns on Doug Ford. That'll be all right. So, all right, that'll do it for us this week on The Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Thanks to Sabrina, John, and Keith. I'm Dave, and we'll put this as well in, if you're listening, you're in the Now and Next feed. Well, it's there. And if you're just listening on The Ledge, join us on Now and Next in the feed there. We're there Monday to Thursday for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.